But they hear what the people they talk. What you get, I shall kill it till love. This is love, and I wanna get another one. I go take and do it in I love. Waiting you love, oh. I'll be waiting, I love, oh. Waiting, I love, I go do what we love, I go. Go, no be vodka. Mr. Money Changer. But when I know the ways that Mr.
You've been gone, it's an empty home. Come on back where you really belong. You are always welcome home, welcome home. You've been kept down for much too long. Stand up, please, and say I am free. Don't forget you are welcome home, welcome home. Come with me on this happy trip back to the promised land. On this happy trip back to the promised land.
Good evening, and it's another beautiful Sunday on Conversation Beyond Borders. We are streaming live on HYT African TV and across all social media platforms. Please tell a family, your friend, and everyone to join in today's conversation so that we will look at what is happening around the world and also in Ghana as a country. Tonight, we are focused on a historic development of the United Nations, a resolution recognizing the trafficking and enslavement of Africans as one of the gravest crimes against humanity. With 123 votes in favor, this movement is being described as long overdue. But the real question is, what does it change exactly? And on the show with me is one person whose voice echoes across all engagements involving Ghana. But before I introduce my guest for tonight, you know how we do it. We're going for a quick commercial break. Please grab a tea and wait for me. Stay tuned.
O afibia mu no nipa mpempem a ewo akwantom ema ne sika ba fie be niam bi te se adansi ayaresa hoka adesua hoka efie sikatua aware hoka ena eyie ene de keka ho nanso oha kese ewo we mu ni kwan ben so na wo fa hu se botaye nti a wo ma ne sika no ye de ye sa wo ma ne sika afa obi so de di sa adwuma we num ne taaya yem hihie pa etoda eche na ahotoso biara eni so we enti na pay angel eden hihie so nko aba sika manem a yeto ne din direct to merchant remittance ye twa ne tia D2MR we ya kwampa a obetimi afa so ama ne sika edi ama ndwumako a woni won di dwuma wo abra emfa odasani ana intemgine ni biara nsem na wakodi usika ubetimi afa D2MR so ama ne sika ama wadofo san hihye yesu boa ndwumako nketo na pa wo D2MR so no usiketua ye mprempren yenje wo hwe yama wo abotayem se usika ekobia ewose eko na ekodi dwuma a ewose edi pay angel D2MR aba masikamania ayememremre esanse emfa hu biem ne bia wo ana edwumako a oni omudin sa wo so ne ewo ye yintem ginafo nyine firi ho na yama wodi dwa na wamma ne sika ntem so eni ahotoso mu hwehwe pay angel kira kwan ewo Google Play Store ana Apple Store tua mo direct ne kase pay angela na wajise se global payments local simplicity.
that dream of studying and working abroad has been made much accessible to everyone, including you. So worry less about how you're going to get there, because we always make it happen. This is Step Finders Ghana Limited. We offer a highly professional guidance and support system, both in your university and visa application process. Step Finders Ghana Limited is a highly trusted agency of the University of the West of Scotland, one of the largest modern universities offering a range of academic, social, and sporting facilities. You can apply for undergraduate, master's and PhD in business and creative industries, education, social sciences, computing, engineering, physical sciences, health, and life sciences. Come through Step Finders, and for your studies, you get yourself a laptop or a £500 gift voucher. Call on +233 598 488804. WhatsApp on +44 7404 711 049. Send us an email or visit our website for more information.
Thanks for staying with me and welcome back. So joining me this evening is Mr. Conrad Dumba, Chairman of the UK and Ireland chapter. He is a key voice in this conversation and someone closely connected to Ghana's role in pushing this agenda forward. Thank you for joining us, Chairman.
Good, a very good evening, my brother and my sister. How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
By the grace, we are doing well. We are doing very well.
Great. So before we even talk about this reparation, let's start here. What do you personally understand by the transatlantic slave trade?
Thank you very much, Kiki. And a good shout out to all the cherished viewers and to your producers in the studios. And before we can even conceptualize the transatlantic slave trade, I think that the most important thing is to be clear that the transatlantic slave trade is probably the latest or the most recent in memory in terms of the forms of slavery that have existed, organized, more structuralized slavery. There are other precedents to it which we will come into. But slavery generally is a concept where one person goes under the servitude of another. In other words, one person is compelled to serve another in many forms, whether it's in a domestic form, whether it's in doing labor, whether it's in being used for other purposes, sexual purposes and other stuff, without their consent, generally, and in a forced form, they are compelled to do it. And I think this is generally the definition you tend to find even in modern times. And I dare say slavery is as old as Adam, if I may use that terminology. It's one of the oldest things that from the dawn of humanity, mankind has always sought to prosecute a system where they are able to profit off their fellows without having to pay for the services of those. And there are different types of slavery. So for now, I think that when we talk about the transatlantic slave trade, we are talking purposely about the organized and systemic regulated system of exploitation whereby European powers forcibly extracted people
along the coast of West.
Origin.
Right.
Forcibly extracted people of African origin from their homeland and took them to the Americans predominantly and exploited them in the harshest possible term ever. But there are precedents. And we might be able to talk about some of those precedents before we even go to the transatlantic slave trade. You have the trans-Saharan slave trade. You have slavery going as far back as the days of the Roman Empire. Almost every empire has some form of slavery. But there's something unique about this. And I think once we get into talking about them, we'll probably be able to talk about what was slavery before them, what was different about this particular one, and why is it necessary that what has happened should happen.
Right. Thank you so much, Chairman. But why is this so important? Do you think acknowledging Africa involvement weakens or strengthens the case for reparation?
That is interesting. And I would like to go a little bit. I studied history in secondary school, and I always loved the element of history. Particularly slavery and slave trade was something that I found quite abhorrent. And just echoing what I said earlier on, and then I come back to what we call collusion by Africans, and how that we will have other, if you like, comparators. But first and foremost, you see, slavery is not alien. Even in our own societies, and I just want to briefly touch on that. If you go back to African societies, not just African societies, Middle Eastern societies from the kingdoms of Babylon. If you remember, the Israelites at the time were conquered and taken into slavery in Babylon.
Yeah.
You had slavery in Rome. You had slavery across the Levant, across North Africa, across all of Africa. In fact, there are documented cases of slaves actually becoming kings or becoming emperors subsequent to it. And when you study that form of slavery, you will realize it was markedly different from this horrific particular one. All slavery to a certain extent is slavery. Slavery is always bad. But in the African society, I will start from that as an example. We had a term that was called pawnship, P-A-U-on, like today you go and pawn off your product at a cash converter or anywhere, whereby a person, for example, family A, wanted to borrow money from family B to provide collateral or to be able to pay off that loan. Family A will yield their son to family B as a form of slave for them to continue working for family A, whether it's in their farm, in their business or whatever, until such time that that was paid off, and then the child could potentially come back. So there's well-documented evidence of slaves being able to buy their freedom, slaves being able to come to the end of their servitude. That was one way by which slavery happened. The other predominant one was basically where a person, and if you look at the Bible and most holy scripts, they will tell you that a person who incurs debt they were able to pay was sold off into slavery. What does that basically mean? In most such instances, these people were sold off into slavery to enable them pay off the debt that they owed. And as soon as that debt was fully settled or fully paid off, such persons were what? Released back to wherever they were. In most cases. Right? And there's also documented about the trans-Saharan slave trade.
Can you hear me? You're breaking a bit.
Okay, I can hear you loud and clear.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, it's better now. Thank you.
Yeah. So when you talk about the trans-Saharan slave trade, what we must understand is that at that time, slavery was not peculiar to blacks only, right? Arabs could be made slaves. People of African origin could be made slaves. Europeans could be made slaves. In fact, the term Slavs, when you look at what you call the Slavic people, mostly Eastern Europeans, right? The word Slav traditionally comes from the word slave, because most of them were so enslaved so much by the Turks in the Middle East area, the Arabs, and so on and so forth, that it almost became connotative to their name. They were referred to as the Slavic people, the slaves, and today the word Slav still sits with them. So you're looking at almost all of Eastern Europe, those called the Slavs. So, and take note of this, slavery in those days was not race-based. It was not racially motivated. It didn't matter where you are. There was one version where you went to war, you had one European king goes to war with another European king. When you conquer them, they take oftentimes they'll slaughter most of the men, take the women and children and sell them into slavery. It didn't matter whether you were black, you were brown, you were blue, you were green, it did not matter. Just take note of that. We'll come to transatlantic slave trade.
Right.
In fact, under the Fatimid dynasty, the Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt, you know, there was a variant of Arabs or Muslims who drew their inspiration from the Prophet Muhammad's daughter Fatima. So they called them the Fatimid Caliphate, and their capital was modern-day Cairo. In fact, they raided the shores of Europe so much so that they were able, the majority of their slaves were European. And this was at the time that some Arab merchants, Berbers, African Berbers, you know the Berbers in North Africa, they are not Arabs, they are Berbers. Most of them, they were trading with the kingdoms of Songhai, the kingdom of Ghana, the ancient kingdom of Ghana, which was one of the first three. You remember Ghana kingdom, then you came Mali, Sundiata Keita, then you came to Askia the Great on Songhai Empire. All of these empires were based on trade of slaves, of salt, of gold. And these slaves, in fact, it is documented that in the kingdom of Mali, some of the kings of the kingdom of Mali preferred Arab slaves and European slaves. And those slaves, mostly female slaves, were used in their harems. You know, the harems for concubinage. They became the concubines of the king. The male slaves were mainly used for either being domestic helps, or sometimes they were moved into the army. So a lot of medieval empires, their armies were made of slaves. And some of these slaves, after serving the army for a while, you could be released. In fact, one of the most privileged status that, and I see a number of people confusing in recent times, confusing the castrating of slaves with so much horror. Yes, it was horrific, but let me tell you something. Slave or no slave, in those medieval days, a man who allowed themselves to be castrated could become what you call eunuchs. Those eunuchs could be some of the most powerful men in the kingdoms and empires. They were put in charge of the king's harems. After all, once they are castrated, it means they are no danger to the king's concubines in the harems. They were top administrators. They ran empires. And so it is estimated that the value of a slave could go up by as much as 30 times once they were castrated. So ironically, yes.
Mr. Conrad, so are you saying that being a slave is not bad in those days?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm setting a certain context. I'm building a certain global view of what slavery was back then. Then comes, so I want us to contextualize slavery right from the dawn of time, from the empires of Babylon, Persia, Egypt, the Greek kingdoms and empires, the Egyptians, the kingdoms of Ghana, Mali. At that time, slavery was mainly domestic stuff, sexual exploitation, using them in various forms. Now, let's come to the transatlantic slave trade. And this is why we as Africans must understand why the transatlantic slave trade is the worst form of slavery that ever existed and is so distinct from all the others. There are some of the things I've talked about in terms of some benefits that slaves had. For example, in Islam, for example, and it's well documented in some parts of the Arab world to date. You have some blacks there. But when a slave owner, for example, took a female slave and lay with her and gave birth, that lady was entitled to be free upon the death of that slave owner. And it's well documented that some of them were released. What is harrowing about the transatlantic slave trade is this. The Europeans deliberately racialized the transatlantic slave trade. The trans-Saharan slave, together with previous versions of slavery, and this is why I painted the picture to let you know that African kings in Andalusia, African kings in sub-Saharan Africa had European slaves, had Arab slaves, had slaves from all parts of the world. So slavery was a thing of you getting into debt, you being captured in war as a loser, being sold as slave. It did not connote with your skin. It was the transatlantic slave trade that was purposely connotated with racism and the African. And how did we even get to that? When the Europeans settled in the Americas, they first started using the native Indians, the Native Americans, as we call them. They used them on their plantation farms. And they were so brutal in the use of whips and dogs on them, such that within a very short space of time, they whittled the population of these native Indians from almost 3 million that they have found to barely 11,000. And then it then created a crisis where there was a lack of labor. They sent word back to metropolitan Europe. And this is the irony. There was a Catholic priest called Lacazas. Lacazas told them that he has encountered African slaves in Arabia and in North Africa. And they are stronger and steelier. And so go for those ones. So the irony of it is that it was a Catholic slave that actually encouraged this. They went through the Atlantic and they were capturing slaves. Now, when they went there, it was no longer a case of somebody owes you money. Therefore, you can sell them into slavery, and once you finish paying, they can come back. Or the kind of chattel slavery that we're talking about, domestic slavery. No, that was not it. They went on a massive scale where they were purposely kidnapping people. They would sometimes go to the shores of Africa and engage in slave raids. You go to your farm, you don't come back. Your child is playing there. Some European person in the forest tricks them with some sweets or dates or something. They are gone. So there was open being kidnapped. On top of that, they were purposely arming African kingdoms against African kingdoms, encouraging them to fight so that they could procure slaves for them. So when you look at certain warlords like Babatu or Samori up in the northern part, and there were large numbers of northern people, you know, especially if you look at the areas around Sandema where you have take tall, not like we the dwarfs. They take tall guys that were very able-bodied were the ones that were wanted. And these people were extracted from the core of Africa to the coast. So the Europeans did two things. One was they deliberately racialized slavery and made it a black man thing. And we'll come to how it got worse. Two, they made it a norm. They introduced something called Panyara. Remember, initially I was telling you that a person owes you money, voluntarily they serve you and after. When the Europeans brought in, they converted pawnship into Panyara. And the Panyara actually comes from a Portuguese way of seizing somebody. There is well-documented history of European people either directly seizing innocent people and putting them in ships and sending them across. Even when they very little, what do you call it, cost to do so.
Right. Mr. Conrad, before you get on, and ladies and gentlemen, to fully grasp the discussion, please take a moment to watch this video.
The chained captives were forced onto ships destined to the New World for the long and brutal voyage known as the Middle Passage. Conditions on the ships were indescribably inhumane. The enslaved Africans weren't treated as human beings. They were treated like cargo.
Men and women shackled together, stacked on top of each other. There was a process known as tight packing, where you literally had slave trading scientists who tried to figure out the maximum way to squeeze as many human beings as possible into the holds of these ships.
Incredibly, about 12.5 million Africans were shipped to the New World between 1525 and 1866. About 15% didn't survive the journey.
4 centuries of trafficking in human beings. And over the course of that time, we're talking about millions of souls involved and millions of souls lost. And yet people endured. And yet they survived.
The overwhelming majority went to destinations other than North America. Of the 12.5 million Africans shipped to the New World as slaves, it's estimated about 450,000 landed on our shores. While a law passed by Congress in 1808 banned the transatlantic slave trade, thousands of slaves are estimated to have been smuggled into our country up to the Civil War. By 1860, the enslaved population in the United States had grown to about 4 million people, a staggering number when you consider that the national population at the time was 31 million. The horrors of slavery in the United States would persist until 1865, when, following the end of the Civil War, the 13th Amendment was ratified. But the repercussions of institutional slavery are still being felt to this day, as African Americans continue to fight for equal rights and for the right to be heard.
Right. Chairman, over to you.
Thank you very much, my sister. And I thank you for playing clips of that video. That helps to make the case I was trying to make.
Yeah.
There are elements of it that tell you how it became a science, how to pack Africans like sardines into these places. You don't even want to go to where the Cape Coast Castle, for example, where you see the gate of no return, you see the conditions under which they were, right? You had laws being made in Europe that deliberately almost criminalized being black. Every black man was equal to a slave. And that racial element was injected into it. And you must remember that slavery did not just happen when they came in. And that's why I built the point about making it clear that prior to that, slavery was universal, it was not race-based. Slavery is always wrong. But when we talk about what we want them to apologize for, it's for the fact that to date, the Europeans are the ones who deliberately racialized slavery, who commoditized slavery, There was no documented situation of slaves being used on an industrial scale on plantation farms and treated like horses and cattle. Whether in Europe, in Africa, or those days, mostly it was domestic, yes, sometimes in the mines and stuff, but nothing as organized as what they did. What they did was on a scale unfathomable. If you think about it, in the space of 3 centuries, 350 years, over 12.5 million landed on the shores of the Americas. Of that, more than 3 million died. In those days, you only had to be coughing in the ship and you'll be unshackled and thrown overboard into the sea because they didn't want you to infect the other slaves. That's all it took. So you just had to show any signs of being unwell, and then off you go. You were thrown off board. And by God, almost 1/3 of every single ship that was sent, and that's the minimum. There were times when more than half the slaves on board, because of how they were packed and cramped in, and they had to defecate and urinate exactly where they lay. They were shackled. And any signs, they were thrown overboard. That is part of the dehumanization. And there were laws in this country that legitimized this. And there were royal charters signed by the king across, not just the English king, the French, the Dutch, all of them were in it. You had royal deliberate laws that were put in place to allow the deliberate enslavement of Africans, and they were specifically to be picked off across the Gulf of Guinea, the West African coast. And that's how come you have a lot of the slaves come across, particularly notoriously the Gold Coast. So when you look at this particular form of slavery, all slavery is wrong and must be apologized for. But to date, you and I, when you walk around and you look at racism, racism was entrenched at the time of slavery. And to date, you can see it very acutely even in the US. Because in the consciousness of the white man, the black man is supposed to be a slave. We are still living with the ramifications to date. And if you think about it, it was the most able-bodied people in Africa that were shipped out. Right. And so when you paint this picture, you come to no less a conclusion as to whether or not this was a crime against humanity. Now, ironically, when slavery was stopped, those who owned slavery were compensated to the tune of over 20 billion in today's money. We are not even asking. President John Dramani Mahama did not even ask for that reparations. But this is the context I wanted to set before we even get into further conversations.
Right, thank you. So right now, we've seen Ghana. Ghana, she has positioned herself as a moral voice on this historical justice for years. So what role did she actually play behind the scenes in securing this outcome?
So I think definitely there was a lot of lobbying, and you must remember that President Mahama was not the first president of Ghana who tried to do something about slavery. The immediate past president, Nana Addo, tried to. Unfortunately, he didn't get much currency because most other African countries didn't pay much heed to him. He went straight for the money. We want reparations to occur. But the most important thing is an acknowledgement that it's a crime against humanity. No less than the Holocaust. Today, you and I agree that the Holocaust, in which an estimated about at least 3 million Jews were murdered in the space of a couple of years, is a crime against humanity. And for that, Germany to date has paid over 80 billion in reparations to Jews, to Israel, and continues to pay into funds for pension funds and other welfare activities for survivors of the Holocaust. That is right, and slavery is no different. In fact, slavery is a more graver form. All death is death, all killing is bad. But if you contextualize it, and what President Mahama did was to build a broad consensus. One, people could see that he was not opportunistic. He was asking first and foremost, you need to acknowledge that this is the gravest crime of humanity, and there is no other crime that comes anywhere near it. You can list any of the genocides, whether it's the Armenian genocide, whether it's the Holocaust. No other crime in world's history goes through this. Even to give you context, the organized trans-Saharan slave trade took place over 1,300 years. And it's estimated about 6 million Africans, Arabs, and others were enslaved. The transatlantic slave trade took place for only 1/3 of that time, 350 years, as against 1,300 years. And that one had almost double the number of slaves, and more ruthless. And to date, we can see the impact, especially in the southern states in the US.
So would
So
you
what
describe
President
this?
Mahama did was lobbying, working with fellow Africans, and that is why you will notice that every single African, both in the mother continent and in the diaspora, because the Caribbeans were all Africans, they were solidly behind us. Almost all Asians were behind us, but only 3 people chose to vote against, and the others, those who abstained, you could see they were the ones who are guilty. Do you expect us to vote for Christmas?
Right. So would you describe this as a diplomatic win for Ghana, or is it a victory for Africa?
I think this is a massive and seismic diplomatic win for Africa as a whole. And Ghana's role in this cannot be overemphasized. We almost have the new Nkrumah in our midst. President Mahama can easily be deemed our new Nkrumah. We are back to the days when we were not just selfish and focused on ourselves, but focused on the welfare of the black man at the world stage. After all, it was not too long ago that our country was responsible for reporting fellow Africans, Burkina, and snitching on them. That's not how you build a Pan-African view. What President Mahama has done is brought back the leadership of Pan-Africanism to Ghana. And you will notice that people like Al Sharpton and many other of our brothers in the CARICOM, the Caribbeans, and across Africa have acknowledged it. That historic place that President Nkrumah put us, President Mahama has taken that baton back. And I think that this is a very seismic first step. Because we leave it, we may not see the impact of it. Those who leave the independence of Ghana did not realize the impact. Generations to come, the fact that the world has, for the first time, after centuries, almost 2 centuries after that crime, the world has had to now acknowledge that what was done to Black Africans, for which we still have reverberations today, is the gravest crime. I think that that is a very massive feat that President Mahama has scored, not just for Ghana, but for Africa.
Hello, Chairman, can you hear me?
And
you are breaking.
Not just for every single one our sons in the
Chairman. Mr. Conrad, please, you are breaking.
Providing this leadership.
Mr. Conrad, can you hear me?
I'm not sure where I got to. I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, your line was breaking at some point.
No, I apologize. I was simply saying in short that what President Mahama has done is a great feat scored not for himself, not for Ghana, not just for Africans, Africa as a continent, but for every single African. That we can hold our head high and say that for once, for the first time, that great sacrilege, that gravest of all crimes that was committed against our forebears and still plagues us today has been acknowledged at no less a place than the United Nations. So I think that President Mahama deserves a massive doffing of the hat for leading this and for leading it in such a way that it had consensus among the afflicted and all well-meaning people of this world.
Right, let me ask this before we go for a quick commercial break. So while the 120 countries voted in favor, we have 52 people who totally abstained from it. And that is not significant enough. So what does their hesitation actually tell you? What can you tell us about they being hesitant to vote?
I can easily tell you something. I mean, we are all here. We are British, much as we are Africans. We all know the Englishman always counts the money before he speaks, right? They know very well that they are guilty, and as guilty as the word G. And therefore, they are very hesitant to say sorry. Because the moment they say sorry, what do you think is going to happen? They would think that Africans would say yes to a cap, pay for it. We live here. Only 2 days ago, we were told that you have children that were forcibly put into care, right? Children that were forcibly put into care homes. The state apologized, and the next logical step was what? How do they make reparations? And in their quest not to want to pay up for the crimes they've committed, they are refusing to apologize. But what it tells us is that these people have still not grasped the enormity of the things they do. When you and I walk on those streets in London and you see some Tom, Dick, or Harry walking around looking at you, seeing you as inferior, it all traces back to this racialized form of what? Slavery, which was then followed immediately by what? Colonialism. Followed straight away then by what? Neo-colonialism to date. So that is how deep it goes, so much so that the perpetrators, still in the majority, do not appreciate the enormity of the crime that they have committed. So why do you think they would say sorry? The leaders know it. Why do you think President Trump has stopped the teaching of slavery in schools? Because every rational being who finds out this is what was done to fellow human beings will know that, yes, we owe them an apology. And it's ironic when they say it is not in our place to apologize for the actions of our ancestors, and yet you celebrate the achievements of those ancestors. Go around all your Buckingham Palaces, your Westminster cathedrals, even your Westminster Palace, your, what do you call it, House of Parliament. These were built on the back of slave labor. You cannot enjoy the benefits of slavery to date and deny the responsibility to apologize for the harrowing experiences you put others through. So I see their abstention, and it's quite telling that they did not oppose it. A few people who are not well screwed up did oppose it. The Americans under Trump, everybody knows it. You don't need to make apologies for it. He's just who he is. And you would have been the last.
Don't you think probably they were facing some sort of political pressure, or there was a resistance behind the scene during the negotiation?
Well, at the end of the day, see, there are some European countries who voted for it. It was mostly those who were perpetrators, the likes of France, the likes of UK. They are the ones who chose to abstain. When it comes to the case of Argentina, Israel, US, as for Israel, it's actually quite contradictory that a country that went through the Holocaust and had reparations paid and has gone through such and understands it will vote against something worse than that. That beats my mind, except to say that would be hypocrisy. As for the Argentines, we know the documented history of how Argentines treated slaves. After slavery was abolished, the Argentinian Republic made conscious efforts to deliberately push as many blacks in Argentina across the border into Brazil through open means by lynching them. It was being a black man who was a slave in Argentina was a death sentence. One way or the other, you flee to Brazil or they found a way of killing you. And with the women, they married them in, assimilated them in, and then just made sure the lineage was whittled out. And that's why you have a very teeny tiny minority of slaves in Argentina. That kind of racialized view informs the thoughts of the likes of Milei, this joker who's there as their president. You don't need to look far to expect any better from people like that. It's the Americans, of course, under a better leader, and I dare say so, would have had a much more matured response to it, because America was built on slavery. There is no other country in this world that benefited more from transatlantic slavery than America, and the scars of it are still there today. And so for them to vote against it and actually threaten other countries not to, it was the worst form of moral turpitude, if not hypocrisy.
Thank you so much, Chairman, for the submission. Dear viewers, let's go for a quick commercial break. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
After a long day at work, there's one thing still on your mind. I need to send money home, and fast. With just one tap on the PayAngel app, you unlock your true power. Zero fees, lightning fast transfers, maximum impact. You soar across cities and oceans. Faster, safer, stronger. Powered by PayAngel, where every transfer is a mission of love. Back home, your family feels it instantly. Joy, hope, and pride. Because when you send with PayAngel, you're not just sending money, you're sending care. Be the hero back home with PayAngel. Zero fees, instant transfers, maximum impact.
Welcome back, and thanks for staying with us. Mr. Conrad, so why has this become the focal point of global justice, compared to all conversations around other slaves like you mentioned earlier in your submissions?
I think it's one because of the fact that the impact of that slavery still reverberates to date, right? And I'm not the type who says that Europeans should go and give us money in Ghana or in Africa to make up for this slavery. That's not going to save us anything at all. You know, giving a man a fish, as Confucius say, you don't give a man a fish, you teach them to fish. The reparations do not have to be cash. If you ask me personally, it shouldn't be cash. The most important thing must be the acknowledgement. The apology is the beginning of the acknowledgement. Because
but we need the money.
If you ask me, do we need the money or do we need the means to be able to make our own money? That is a fundamental question. Yes, I don't have a problem with the money being needed when there are other issues. How are you going to even give that money? Which country are you going to give to? In what ratio? Somebody will say, Benin will say, we had more taken from us than here. We can go into the concept of the money and how we want it. In other parts, we've seen reparations in the form of what? Technology transfer. We've seen reparations in the form of restorative justice, where you have communities most blighted by it, having schemes that help them. We've seen it happen. We have the model that has been used post-World War II in terms of reparations to how the Jews were persecuted. For me, let us start by acknowledging that what are the other forms of slavery that are existing today, in quotes, on equal trade terms? Why is it that the way the West related with Japan meant that Japan, a country that had been destroyed by nuclear weapons in 1945, today is the first world country? Why? Why is it that the way the West dealt with Germany, a country that was completely destroyed, annihilated, and pounded into pulp? They had the Marshall plans, they had various plans where they deliberately transferred technology. They provided credit on very favorable basis to lift them up. You don't need cash transfer. What Africa needs is fair trade. Because the amount of trade, the nature of the trade between the West and Africa as we speak now is almost the same as slavery. Our resources are being raped out of our lands and brought here. So when the apology starts, when restitution has to start, when reparations have to start, that's where it starts. Let me give you a simple example. And signs a credit agreement with the British for over $700 million to rehabilitate some ports. And how does it go? All the steel that will be used in those ports will be produced by British Steel in the UK and shipped to them. The funding comes from the UK. The companies that will build those ports or refurbish those ports are British. The material that will be used are British steel. So guess what's going to happen? The contracts will probably be inflated. They will bring all the workers and only take a few laborers here and there. They'll bring all the material, come and do whatever job they have. The money won't go to Nigeria because the British contractor working in Nigeria will get the money paid into his account. In Britain, it stays here. Jobs are not created. Proper reparations will mean that, listen, that full 700 million should go to Nigeria. Let it be Nigerian contractors. Let it be a Nigerian steel mill. So if Nigeria doesn't have a steel mill to build those ports, let's help them build a steel plant purposely for those ports. So we will mine the iron that we need in Nigeria, use it to produce the steel needed in Nigeria, and use that to what? Refurbish the ports in Nigeria. Every single one of the 700 million should stay in Nigeria. That is an example. When you come to trade, we still have slavery, Slavic trade arrangements that need to be dropped. And so when they apologize, that is what Africans we should be fighting for. Because if the full 700 million goes into Nigeria, you can see what the impact would be. It's the same in Ghana. It's the same in Guinea. We still have a slavery of mentality where our resources are taken to metropolitan Europe. We should get to a point where, for example, for Ghana, if they are truly sorry, we say, listen, no more chocolates being made here when cocoa is grown in Ghana. Every British company, if you are restorative in your mindset, Belgian chocolate, and the Belgians by far are the worst perpetrators of colonialism and slavery in Congo. Let them set up the chocolate factory in Zaire, in Congo, DR Congo. Let them produce the chocolate to their own standard so that they are Congolese and bring the product here. Let them open their markets to us, treating us as equals. They treat the Japanese as equals. They treat the Germans as equals. They treat others as equals. But behind the mentality, we Africans, because of slavery and what has been put into their minds, they still see us as inferior. And so that restorative justice, the reparations, in my view, should not just be take cash. Trust me, if you say take cash, that money will not even end up in Ghana. It will end up in someone's face account. We want technology transfer. We want fair trade terms. We are not even looking for favors as a starting point. And that for me is more than any cash that can ever be sent. But before they can get to that state of mind, we want the apology and the acknowledgement that what was done is wrong. And then the downstream impact to date should then be addressed. How do you address racism in today's Britain? How do you address racism in today's France? Why is it that to date you have French central bank being effectively the central bank for all the French francophone countries in Africa? That is still a financial slavery. And so until that is acknowledged, we can move forward. And that is what we should focus on. And that is why it is important now more than ever, knowing the impact of slavery, that we get those who perpetuated it to not just apologize and acknowledge that is the worst crime that is still going on in some shape or form, but make a stop. You don't even need your cash. Stop doing what you are doing. And I think that that is what Africans we should be advocating, rather than just cash that can disappear in seconds.
Right, Mr. Conrad. So this is just not an African issue. It's an African, a global African story. So what message does this send to the Africans in the diaspora?
So there are two types of Africans in the diaspora. There are you and I who grew up in Africa, Mother Africa, and have found our way here. There are Africans who grew up here, were born here, and know no better or no other than Africa. I think first and foremost, this resolution is an acknowledgement to the people of Jamaica, the people of Haiti, the people of Guyana, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, that as Africans on the motherland, on Mother Africa, we still care about them. By far, they need this apology more than you and I in Ghana, because it is their ancestors. You and our ancestors managed to get themselves protected from slavery. Well, however they did it, they escaped, they hid themselves, they protected themselves. Those in Jamaica, in Haiti, in Guyana, in Antilles, they are the ones whose ancestors were forcibly taken out there. They are the survivors. So first and foremost, I think that what this shows is that even African as we are in Ghana, we still care about them. We still care that the apology should go to them. We should care that any reparation should primarily have them at front of mind. And as an African, first and foremost, I hold my head high as an African and as a Ghanaian, because we have been able to master that courage to tell them you have to apologize for this. And we have been able to use the very institutions, imperial institutions like the United Nations, to lobby to get a majority of 123 countries to vote for us. We are playing the game, and we should learn how to continue to play the game. So that fills me with a certain pride. Is it not a shame that over 2 centuries after slavery, right? Over 2 centuries after slavery, going to 2.5 centuries, it is only now that we Africans have been able to get the world to acknowledge that that is the gravest crimes? What have we been doing all along? And why have we not forced this agenda? So I think that better late than never is very welcome, and it should fill all of us with a source of pride. All Africans in the diaspora, those of us in Ghana or in Africa, those of us from Africa, outside Africa, and those of us Africans who were born outside Africa and still live outside Africa, like the Caribbeans.
Right. So how can this movement be leveraged to build stronger unity between Africa and its diaspora communities? Because those Africans in the diaspora, sometimes they don't even want to associate themselves with the Africans that have moved here. And they blame each other that, oh, you sold us, it's just one storyline, you sold us. And so in a way, they kind of pass their anger and anguish on people that are here. So how can this build that stronger unity that we need, so that they know that, look, we are, in as much as we are sorry about what happened, we are also open to having that peace and harmony, to stay in that peace and harmony with you, or maybe start from somewhere?
It's a brilliant question. And for me, in my mind, there are 2 ways this can be done. First and foremost, by us in Africa advocating this, it sends a signal to every other African outside of Africa that we care and we are one. And it was very refreshing to hear people from the Caribbean on the floor of the United Nations praising President Mahama for doing this. And so I think that sends a signal that first and foremost, they are as much victims as we are victims. We are all in this together. We did not necessarily sell them out. Look, there are always collaborators, even during the Holocaust. The term the kapus, right? It was some Jews that were used to police other Jews and sometimes even to lead them onto the trains that took them to the gas chambers. So there will always be enemies within the entity. There will always be people who betray their own cause. There were Africans who were part of it, who were selling it from time immemorial. Some by coercion, some by virtue of profit, and even to this day, call me any organization in Ghana. When we're going for independence, did we not have some of our brothers take a ship and come to Queen Elizabeth and say, don't give Nkrumah independence? Martin and Hope people, you remember? That is why we didn't get independence in 1951 after the plebiscite. After Nkrumah had resoundingly defeated them, we had to do another election in 1954. They say he's still not popular. And we had to do a third election in 1956 until the British were left in no doubt that the supremo in African Ghanaian politics was Nkrumah. And even with that, on the eve of independence, there were those who wrote to the Queen, actually came here on a ship to tell the Queen, don't give independence to Ghana with Nkrumah there. So you will always have enemies within every entity. But that should not be the cause. It is either because they are either naughty by nature, as we always say, or they have a commercial motive that is in their mind above the collective good. But that should not mean that we Africans who grow up in Africa should be guilty because our ancestors may have collaborated. Some talk about chiefs. No. I think that our Caribbean brothers must recognize that they were as much victims as we were victims. And I am glad that it is not the Prime Minister of Jamaica or Trinidad or Guyana or Barbados that asked for it. It is the Prime Minister, is the President of Ghana, Nkrumah's Ghana, that asked for it. So that should bring us together. The other thing is this now provides a strong platform. This is a watershed movement for us to now be able to work together to see, so what next? First and foremost, the apology is not over. Countries that abstain, we must have a certain diplomatic overture that ensures that Africans in Africa, in other words, across the Caribbean, everywhere you find black men, a sufficient committee must store all these capitals and get them to acknowledge and eventually acknowledge that what their forebears did. And we must assure them we're not interested in your money, but first and foremost, we want you to apologize. After that, all the structures to date that can stand back to the mindset of colonial slavery that translated into colonialism, that translated into neo-colonialism, because it is that racialized view that I am better than you that made them say, let me use you as my horse. To the extent that when they are counting, they say the whites will count themselves, they'll count dogs, Irish dogs, and then they'll count blacks. That must be banished off the mentality. It must be taught in their schools, not to make them feel guilty, but to make them understand that that was the greatest tragedy. And then it flows on to say that led to colonialism, where they still felt they were better than us, and therefore they were entitled to our resources. And that leads to neo-colonialism today, where they still feel they are better than us, and therefore they are entitled to our resources, rip them off, take them away, and if you oppose as a leader, they'll kill you. That must come in, and this is a human right. We talk about human rights today. You and I, if you have a pet and you misbehave, if you treat your pet 1% the way they treated slaves, you go to jail in this country. So at the heart of it, we must let these people understand that these are historic acts of injustice. They've been apologizing for worse here. They've been apologizing for worse. I've just told you, they apologize for forcing people into care homes. If you can apologize for forcing people into a care home, what is wrong with you not apologizing for slavery? So I think it's a platform for us to build that common cause that we need, so that as Caribbeans, as Africans, wherever we find ourselves, we're able to take this case. This is just the beginning. It's the end of the beginning. Now we have to see to the beginning of the end game. What does this mean? Those that have accepted, what are we going to do about it? It starts with the cultural retuning of the Caucasian mind. It also starts with the cultural retuning of our African mind. That story must be told and told properly so that we understand that we are a proud people whose civilization was long advanced before the Caucasians came anywhere near civilization. So I think this is a shared movement for us to work together as Africans, both in the diaspora and on the motherland, to ensure that proper justice and a perspective of human rights is paid to those historic injustices, and restorative actions are taken, not just cash. We stand to gain a lot more from restorative justice than necessarily cash. That's my view.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Dear viewers, let's go for another quick commercial break before we wrap up. We'll be right back.
That dream of studying and working abroad has been made much accessible to everyone, including you. So worry less about how you're going to get there, because we always make it happen. This is Step Finders Ghana Limited. We offer a highly professional guidance and support system, both in your university and visa application process. Step Finders Ghana Limited is a highly trusted agency of the University of the West of Scotland, one of the largest modern universities offering a range of academic, social, and sporting facilities. You can apply for undergraduate, master's and PhD in business and creative industries, education, social sciences, computing, engineering, physical sciences, health, and life sciences. Come through Step Finders, and for your studies, you get yourself a laptop or a £500 gift voucher. Call on +233 598 4888 04. WhatsApp on +44 7404 711 049. Send us an email or visit our website for more information.
Thank you for staying with us and welcome back. So, Mr. Conrad, you know, resolutions come and go at the United Nations. We have, you know, government, other presidents, is transitional. So what must happen next to ensure that this doesn't fade into diplomatic history?
It's a good point you say. And I think that there needs to be a permanent working group set up with appropriate representation and mandate to then see to what the implications are for this historic apology, how we can right the wrongs. I don't believe that it should just simply say after apology to Aka and we'll move on. That will not solve our problems. We need to sit down as Africans and say, one, what lessons can we learn from how we have been able to rally sufficient countries, majority countries, to ensure only 3 countries in the whole wide world, almost 200 countries, only 3 could say no. How did we do that? We congratulate President Mahama for doing it, and then ask the question, how did we do that? Write down that methodology that was adopted in getting that done, and think about, so what next? What are we going to do next? The apology has come. The crime has been accepted as the gravest crime in all of humanity. How do we correct that? That correction doesn't have to be money. I'm not saying money is exclusive, but it should not be money only. The means to money is better than just the money in itself. That is my view. So that is the beginning point. And I think that it has to be collective. This time around, yes, it doesn't just have to be Ghana leading it. You should have representation on that permanent committee from Africans. You should have representation from our brothers in the Caribbean. You should have representation from any other society, black or non-black, that was plagued by slavery and similar injustice. The Aboriginals in Australia, the Native Americans in America. You need all of those so that we have an opportunity to ask for global human rights for once, so that the apostles of human rights will understand that their history stinks and they must confront that first, and to start into how do we translate that apology into the daily things. How do we ensure that every European capital, every European country has a chapter on slavery in their curriculum, so that their children will know when we taught wrong, when we had, if you like, a superiority complex in us, what was the implication on others? So that we will always say, never again should this happen. That for me is very important. Then we understand the current thinking in many institutions, racialized thinking institutions that stand back to slavery. How do we turn that around? And as I said earlier, how will our interactions with metropolitan Europe and the West, who are predominantly responsible for slavery, how will it restore Africans and the Caribbeans? It's not necessarily transfer of cash, transfer of technology, collaboration, treating each other as partners, and making sure that someday the black child and the white child and the Chinese child will hold each other's hands as equals, not just physically, but in mind, in thought, in making human progress, that we are also seen as human as they are. That's
Thank
all
you
we
so
need.
much.
And we need a vehicle, that kind of permanent committee to take this forward. If we stop now and say, we've received the apology, thank you, give us money, we'll go home, we would have missed the boat. It will not go far. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Conrad. So I just want to ask you on a more personal level, what did this moment mean to you, seeing the recognition finally happen on a global stage?
It was a moment of pride. You know, I was beaming with smiles in the office on the day this happened. And I think my colleagues thought I had won the Euro Millions. But I think I won much more than the Euro Millions. For me, it was an act of pride that no other than my own president, His Excellency President John Dramani Mahama, was able to push this feat through. We all know how difficult this is in diplomatic circles. We know how many have tried and failed, but he was able to do it. So that filled me with a lot of pride. Number two, the fact that as an African, the sins that were, if you like, meted out to my ancestors, we are finally getting an apology for it, an acknowledgement to those who committed these, that what they did was wrong. Made me feel quite warm at heart and very happy. And I think it also means then that same must not happen anytime in the future. So I felt glowing at the fact that this achievement was ticked off.
So apart from what you stated about the resolution, if we sit here again in 10 years, what would happen? What do you think should happen again if we had to sit on Conversation Beyond Borders 10 years, and then I ask you, or I bring today's date out, what will be one significant change you will want to see?
I fear that I may not see it, because sometimes we are too short-termist as a people. But what I want to see is that when my child goes to school, they are taught about slavery as much as they are taught about King Alfred or King Henry VIII. That's what I want to see. What I want to see is that my own government, my own people in Africa, my own brothers and sisters in the Caribbean, we work together to ensure that historic acts of injustice that still reverberate to date are addressed. That for me, success or progress. There is a school of thought that it will take a very long time. It took 250 years to get an apology, which the main perpetrators refusing to acknowledge it begrudgingly. How much longer will it take for everybody to say, truly this was wrong? Let us ensure that as much as we teach the Holocaust, and we have the Holocaust Memorial Day, we must have an anti-slavery day, a day that memorializes the mass enslavement of Africans, so that on that day, everybody will know that this was a crime beyond proportions that should not happen. I think that's what we must push for. Once we push for that, gradually in the next 10 years, we probably have the opportunity to change the dynamics of the impact of slavery to date. That's my expectation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Conrad Dumba. So this is Conversation Beyond Borders. And again, our guest for tonight was Mr. Conrad Dumba, the chairman of the UK and Ireland chapter. Thank you so much for sharing your insight with us today. The call for justice is clear. United Nations resolution on the enslavement of Africans is not just symbolic. It is about truth. It is recognition and also restoring our dignity as Africans. The African voice is rising, is demanding to be heard and respected in shaping its own history. The world now must decide how they respond to it, because this is our truth. This is our identity. And still, we demand that you apologize to all Africans. It is Conversation Beyond Borders. And up until next week, have a good night and see you same time next week, 5 p.m. sharp. Thank you.
You've been gone, it's an empty home. Come on back where you really belong. You are always welcome home, welcome home. You've been kept down for much too